Right, Dave, you also, well, you've obviously shown already you're a man of strong opinions and you're not afraid to voice them. Now, everybody's got opinions on horse racing. There's a few topics that keep popping up, so you can talk as little or as much as you want to about them. What about your opinions on the whip?
Yeah, my views on the whip are very well known. You know, I think that I think that British racing has painted itself into a very unfortunate corner. If we start this conversation with Bala Briggs, right, in the 2011 Grand National, I think it was, right, that Jason Maguire's use of the whip on Bala Briggs triggered the BHA inquiry process that resulted in the whip rules that we have now, right? 8 million people watched that race on the BBC. How many rang the BBC, contacted the BBC to complain about Jason Maguire's use of the whip? 8, right? 1 millionth. If we ran a supermarket, right, or a shop together, and I said, if you said, Dave, those pizzas you bought from Italy, we've sold 1 million, which is great, but one bloke came back saying he didn't like the toppings. So I think we might have to look at those. I'd say, Simon, are you fucking mad? One person out of 1 million who's eaten those pizzas brought it back saying he didn't like the toppings. Like 999,000 people went away and enjoyed them. You're bonkers, mate. Do you know what I mean? And that started it. So that is a nonsense numerically, an absolute nonsense. Obviously, there was probably a big hue and cry on Twitter as well, as there is. You know, with Danny Brock recently and the case of the elastic bands. Now, I think the penalties should be much stiffer for modifying a whip, and I also think they should be strict liability offences. So that you can't say my bitter rival knocked a nail into my whip, I didn't know it was there. They say, mate, there was a nail in your whip, it's your responsibility. I know Danny Brock's elastic bands are not whips before anyone gets too excited. It's your responsibility. But I think that the thing that astonishes me, and you know, I suppose I hate the trade paper, the Racing Post stance on this, and both Bruce Millington and Tom Kerr I've disagreed with, but both of them say that they don't think the whip as the compressed foam. I'm calling it. I call it the Pro Cush. I'm going to call it the Pro Cush as by its trade name now, like people did with Hoovers from now on. I'm not calling it the whip. I tried calling it the compressed foam, but that didn't work. But the Pro Cush, right? I mean, Bruce said on Sky Sports Racing the other week, he said, I know they don't hurt. We've got one of the things in the office and you couldn't wake a sleeping kitten with it. Now, obviously he was using license, but what that meant was he didn't consider that the Pro Cush represented a welfare issue, an equine welfare issue. Now, if you think that, you should be educating people to say, right, you think, mate, this is a whip, either Fred Archer's lasher, or you think it's the riding crop with the nylon thing with the leather flaps at the end, and when you hit a horse with it, it hurts. But it's not. It's made out of compressed foam. I used to have one here actually. Could have sort of demonstrated. Don't know where it is. But you could have nothing kicky. You could have. It makes a snapping sound, and you know Greg Wood did an excellent piece with Jim Crowley years ago in the Guardian, say that you know Jim Crowley had given him a leathering with the whip, and it didn't hurt. And I think Tom Kerr, taking over the editorship from Bruce, has a slightly different opinion, but says you know that the tide is flowing one way, that veganism is on the rise, etc., and that there's only one way we can go with it. Well, I disagree with that. I think that we can mount a confident front foot defence of the use of the Pro Cush in horse racing. Like, horse racing is about finding champions. Top level sport is about fine margins, and within ethical boundaries, horses have to be extended until the end of a race. All the people that I know who work in horse racing think it's an ethically defensible sport, and I think the use of the procush is ethically defensible. And I've never heard, again, I don't mean to pick on Bruce. We've had Twitter spats, and I don't want to have another one. But Bruce once said in print that he hadn't heard of one convincing argument about in support of the whip. I mean, I think I pretty much see it the other way. I think it's easily defensible, and I think it's incumbent on the BHA. I was very pleased to see Nick Rust on a whip stand at York Racecourse during the E-Ball meeting, because you're preaching to the converted. Maybe it should have been at York Railway Station or something like that. But I think that the whole process should have started with a press conference and a table where you had, Fred Archer, George Fordham's whip, Steve Donohue's, Gordon Richards, Lester Piggott's, Pat Edery's, Kieran Fallon's, Ryan Moore's, and that way, if you're seeking to restrict the use of any item, whatever, a gun or a knife or whatever it might be, any item, not necessarily one that injures people, the starting point of that debate is the item itself, and I think that that's what they should have done at High Holborn. Should have had a table of whips all the way through to the procush and say, right, everyone, just this is what we're dealing with today.
Okay, what about obviously you say you have to spend about a minute per horse sometimes. Yeah. So speed figures, are you a big fan, and sectionals?
Yes, I think that there's no doubt about the efficacy of the use of timing in racing, and it's incredible to I love racing history, and I was reading a Todd Sloan book when I was on holiday about 3 weeks ago, and going back to the turn of the 1800s to the start of the 20th century, horses in America, obviously you were dealing with more uniform surfaces, but time was employed routinely then to measure performance or to assess performance. So there's no doubt about that. I'd like to know more about it than I do. I'd like someone to write an actual book, not something that I can read online, but something in hard copy. I know it's not going to be it's not going to top the bestsellers list at Christmas, but I'd like someone to write a book, one that pertains hopefully to European or to British racing, so that I could learn more about it. But yeah, obviously, if you're looking at a horse that has posted a fancy figure in a maiden race first time, the first thing you look at is the speed figure, isn't it? To see if that is actually supported by a good time or whether it's not. Because if it's not, the first thing you think is, right, well that might be vulnerable. So. Yeah, I don't think there's any doubt about that. I don't think there's any debate. It's a shame that that we haven't got sectional timing on our tracks. With weighing horses, I'm less convinced about that, because I think that my own weight goes up and down. I'm a keen cyclist, but I also fight against having a bad diet. So I can feel fit, weigh myself, and my weight's gone up because muscle is heavier than fat. But I suppose maybe the best thing to do is to give people as much information as you can, and let them decide what's useful for them.
Okay, now you often hear a big handicap in the summer. Something's been back from 10 to 1 down to 9 to 2. What a shrewd trainer so and so is. Similar things happen on the all weather. He's a cheat. What's the fine line?
Well, I think that the all weather is now climbing out of that sort of cesspit image that it had back in 1989, isn't it? Which is a fantastic thing. I think that it was brilliant that we had a Group 1 race, the Vertum Futurity Trophy at Newcastle, and I'd love to see a Group 1 race run on the all-weather every year. What that may be is pretty much up to the BHA, but I would like to see that as a permanent thing. I think there is obviously a correlation between skullduggery and lower prize money. In the same way, say for example, football, right? What matches do you get unusual betting patterns on in football? It's not the Champions League final, is it? It's like Scottish Division 2. I'm not going to come up with sides for legal reasons, obviously, but two sides who, are part timers, and they've said right, 4-1, and so it's obvious that the scope there is greater, or the need to make money, to make your own opportunities to make money is greater, isn't it, in a lower class of racing?
You don't think it's to do with the celebrity of the trainer?
Yeah, there's obviously a big part of that as well, in that my trade is, there are loads of cliches, aren't there? Shrewd trainer, jockey who doesn't get the opportunities he deserves, and all that sort of thing. One tries to steer away from them, or at least steer away from them in a cliche. Like, I would call Stuart Williams a shrewd trainer, and I don't mean by that a crook, I mean a shrewd trainer, because I think that he is as sharp as a tack. And I think, again, I'm sorry to other trainers who say, well, I think I'm shrewd as well. But he's one trainer that I would have no problem referring to him in print or on racing TV as razor sharp, because I think he is. But obviously there are loads of those cliches that, like, super shrewd so and so, when they can't. It's just lazy, isn't it? They can't think of anything else to say. They're sperm lottery winners, I suppose, or some of those trainers.
Now, the other thing, Cheltenham. Now, is the national hunt season purely focused on Cheltenham? And if you think it is, the Cheltenham Festival, is that a bad thing?
Yes and yes. It's amazing. Like, a few years ago, British racing's marketeers were concentrating on the narrative of the flat season. The flat season's got a brilliant narrative. It starts with the Guineas, or the Guineas trials. Then you talk about the Derby, Royal Ascot, blah blah blah. Like, each day is each Group 1 race is a race in its own right. Okay, if a horse wins the Guineas, obviously it gets we ask the question, especially if it's got a middle distance pedigree, are you going to go for the Derby? But primarily, that horse has won a classic that afternoon. And it's the same with the Derby, it's the same with the King George, right through to the Arc. Like, obviously we mention future races in terms of betting, because especially if we write for papers that are read by punters, obviously we do that. But it's got a great narrative. Cheltenham rules the national hunt season like a tyrant, doesn't it? There are very welcome, the rise of Punchestown, the emergence of the Dublin Racing Festival are very welcome, and the money, the increased purses that are available at Aintree. I hope that can reverse that. I'm sure everyone's sick of a horse winning a novice hurdle from a big yard, winning at Exeter in September or October, and getting a quote for the Supreme Novices. It does irritate me. The King George is one of my very cherished races over jumps. The King George, the Six Chase, and I hate to see that race being used as a trial for the Cheltenham Gold Cup. I really do. And it's difficult to know what the solution is, but there is definitely a problem there.